All right. Good afternoon, good evening, everyone, wherever you happen to be in the world today. Thank you so much for taking time out of your day to attend this latest bootcamp session, Cracking the Code to Building Loyal and Profitable Customers. The idea behind this bootcamp really focuses on the concept that the selling doesn't stop once that contract is signed. There's a lot of MSPs and a lot of businesses actually that place a lot of focus around what's needed to find brand new customers for their business, which is good. Lead gen is very critical, but as critical as lead gen is to growing your MSP, revenue growth doesn't always have to come down to trying to fill the top part of your funnel with fresh new prospects. Your existing clients can also provide a wealth of additional sales opportunities for you if you have the right account management motion in place. One that leverages QBRs. I'm going to be calling them EBRs for today's session, executive business reviews. But the fact is leveraging these ongoing recurring meetings with customers to help uncover new business opportunities for your MSP. So if you've never attended any of my boot camps before, my name is Stephanie Hammond. I am the head nerd here that's responsible for all things sales and marketing related. I've been with Enable for a little while, have had a lot of different roles, moved into the head nerd role about 4 years ago. You can see my contact information is there on the screen, my email address. I'm on LinkedIn, so if you're on LinkedIn, we should be linked together. All right, so let's get things started. I've had a lot of conversations with MSPs over the years, where they have, kind of lamented that they're not seeing the sales growth that they're looking for. And so, in our conversations, they'll say to me, Steph, what are the big guys doing? What are they doing day in and day out, week in and week out, year in and year out? That's really kind of contributing and leading their success. And, how can I achieve kind of the same sales and growth outcomes like they are receiving? And so when we start, dissecting their sales and their marketing motions that they have in place today, one of the things that I do ask is, what are you doing from an account management? And what are you doing from an EBR, executive business review standpoint? And they admit that they really haven't made these two pieces a real priority in their business, or they're doing them, the EBRs or the account management kind of rather sporadically. And implementing a structured account management process, that could be a real growth driver for your MSP. Organizations that excel at account management, and if they are, proactively engaging with their customers, they're seeing 34% more profitability than companies that don't have a defined account management motion in place. They're seeing 50% more sales and revenue generated, and they have a 33% greater chance of being their clients' top choice for future business. And that 33% I can really attest to, because when I was an account manager, I managed different territories over the years. I would often have partners that would reach out to me and say, Steph, we're looking for this kind of solution, or we have this kind of need. But before I started my search, I wanted to see what Enable had first. And if you have a customer coming to you and saying, I'm not sure if you have this or you can do this for me, but I wanted to check with you first, that is golden. When you can achieve that level of trust and respect with your customers, where they're coming to you first to, see what they can purchase from you, that is incredible, because it means how much they value that partnership. So looking at what I'm hoping you're going to take away from today's session, we're going to review the importance of an account management motion and putting that process in place, and what does that look like. And then we're going to talk about, how do you go about developing an executive business review process that accompanies the whole account management motion. And so we're going to review kind of a framework that you can start off with and use if this is something that you're not really doing today. So let's first start about, what is account management and what is that process? Because, you might be thinking, why did you build a whole boot camp just on account management? And again, I think it's such an important component of a sales motion, because you want to really emphasize that the selling doesn't stop once that contract is signed. I have created my whole, 16 out of the 20-year career that I've had with Enable has been in that role of account management. So it definitely is a motion that is near and dear to my heart. And when you think about the MSP industry, it's a terribly competitive industry. I think, our Canalys report was showing that there's 335,000 providers globally that are providing some sort of managed services type of business or have some sort of component to it. And most customers, most businesses already have an MSP partner that they're working with. So being able to generate new leads and finding new prospects to speak to, and then, convincing them that you're better than whoever they're using today, that is a big undertaking to do. And so once you spend all of that time, that money, and that effort to win over those new clients, or basically stealing those clients for somebody else, you want to make sure that you're doing everything you can to retain those clients that you worked so hard to earn. And you don't want them hemorrhaging out the back end after they've already signed on. And so by incorporating a good, solid account management motion that incorporates regular, strategic business reviews, not only are you going to create a loyal base of happy clients and hopefully raving fans, but it's also going to help minimize any churn that you might be experiencing. And it's also going to work to provide you, which I think is a more important benefit, new revenue streams, from your existing customer base in terms of maybe referrals through word of mouth and new sales opportunities, from upselling and cross-selling to your existing base. Because when you think about what it takes to grow your business, there's really only three ways. We can find and sign on net new clients, and that's really what the last 14 boot camps that I've delivered really entails. How do you do marketing and lead gen and finding clients and taking those clients through the sales process so they become a new signed deal in the end. You can also work to increase the share of wallet, expand the share of wallet and the portfolio breadth of services within your existing customer base, and then you can also sell more to your existing base more often. So really the moral here is we don't want to neglect the potential revenue that could be right underneath our noses. And by doing all of this, that's what's going to provide you with a more predictable and stable pipeline, which is fantastic when it comes to future sales forecasting capabilities. And that's going to really help improve and increase the overall business valuation of your MSP. And when you look at, private investors or private equity firms or anybody that's looking to invest or maybe purchase another MSP, they do place a high degree of importance on, what is that MSP doing to provide an amazing customer experience for their clients, and what efforts are they have they implemented to help reduce churn. And so if you are an MSP listening to me today and you would like to retire, by selling your business someday, if you don't have an account management motion in place today, I really encourage you to consider implementing one. Because again, I'm the testament to that. Enable invested heavily into the account management motion, 20 years ago. I was the first account manager that Enable brought on. And now we've grown to 1,800 employees, and we're a global company, and we're on the New York Stock Exchange. And I like to think we've reached that level of success because we did put such a focus on account management. I think we have over 200 partner success managers currently. So it is something that is a real revenue driver for organizations that have that in place. Because when you look at, this comes from the book Marketing Metrics, when you're selling to a new prospect, you have maybe about a 5 to 20% chance, maybe you're a really good closer, maybe it's a 30 or 40% chance of making that sale. But when you're selling to an existing client, that probability skyrockets, close to 60 to 70%. And according to the 2022 Service Leadership Report, it's a report that we get, I think, on a biannual basis for that. It tracks, benchmarking from different MSPs that subscribe to it. But I think they were saying in 2022, the average cost to bring on a brand new client is between $32,000 and $37,000 now. So very critical not to ignore our existing customers, the ones that you've worked really hard to win over, you've onboarded them, they should be seen as an incredibly viable source of revenue growth for your MSP, especially if maybe you're a little bit challenged when it comes to the marketing and the sales side of things. Maybe you're struggling trying to win and attract new customers to your organizations. If that is the case, then there is money to be had in making that account management motion a critical component of your overall sales motion, and putting a focus on that. So looking at what goes into the account management process, if this is something that you're not really doing today, step one of building that account management process is all around scheduling a pre-sales introduction meeting, with all new clients. And this takes place prior to the deal closing. And I think these meetings are really critical, because even before the prospect signs on as that new client, this is an opportunity for you to bring that account manager into the sales process and introduce them to the prospect, to give the prospect an idea of what they can expect once they sign on as a new client. There's a really good book that I read, Joey Coleman, he's the author of the book Never Lose a Customer Again, and he really references as pre-framing, kind of setting expectations with the prospect before the sale closes, kind of providing them a hint of the good things to come, essentially, and to help them align them with your own company operations. And this also allows to ensure that both the salesperson and the account manager are on the same page. It allows the account manager to get that understanding of what is being proposed to the prospect, so that the account manager isn't caught off guard after the sale, because maybe the salesperson said something that wasn't quite right, that could potentially damage the relationship post-sale. Not to say that, salespeople are always trying to stretch the truth in order to close the deal, but as an account manager, I would want to make sure that I was part of those initial meetings, or those closing set of meetings, so I had a really good understanding of what the salesperson was saying, and ultimately what our partner was buying. It also helps to avoid that feeling that maybe a customer may have of, I've kind of been dealing with this person for the last several weeks, but then I signed on and then I got handed off to this new person. So they kind of feel like they got kicked to the curb and forgotten about. So, by bringing that account manager into the mix, you're showing them that they're going to have a dedicated account manager moving forward who's going to be solely focused on their business. And so the idea with these pre-sales introduction meetings is to use these meetings to really help create that sense of familiarity, but prior to signing on. Step two of the account management framework, this is where, once the customer is signed on, you want to schedule, this is an internal meeting, a post-sales handoff meeting between the account executive and the account manager who's going to be taking over the account moving forward. The goal of this internal handoff meeting is, again, just to ensure that the salesperson provides that account manager with, all of their pre-sale notes. So hopefully there are pre-sale notes. Give them a rundown of everything that was discussed during that sales process. Like, what are the challenges? What are the priorities? What are the key objectives, the expectations that the customer has, so that the account manager is brought up to speed and is able to start that relationship on the right foot, because there is nothing more frustrating than the customer having to retell their history and retell their backstory after they've already told it to the salesperson. So you want to have this internal meeting so you don't have to ask that customer to kind of retell their story, once they get transitioned over the account manager. Step three of the framework, this is where you then schedule that kickoff meeting with the new customer, and this is what sets everything in motion. And ideally, you want to schedule this meeting as soon as you can once the contract is signed. And we want to make sure that we're including all of the key stakeholders in that initial meeting. The customer at this point in time is hopefully extremely happy to be partnering with you. And so by scheduling this meeting as soon as you can upon them signing on, this is showing that you are equally as excited to have them as a customer, because this is the type of meeting where you're going to review the onboarding and the implementation plan with everyone. You're going to make introductions to key colleagues from your team who might not have been involved in the sales process, but they might be involved in the implementation afterwards. So we want to make those introductions. This is where you want to talk about what your support processes are, what your support structure is. Work with them and teach them and communicate how to best engage with your team and work with your team whenever an issue may come up. Whether it's, okay, this is how you use our help desk portal, or just call in, or we have chat, or you just use this portal to create a ticket, whatever that process is. This is where you want to explain your role as the account manager. You essentially are that first point of contact for the customer if they have any issues, outside a technical issue. That's where you're going to want them to create a case, but really kind of talk about your role and how you fit into the overall mix. And it's basically just letting the new customer know everything that they need to know on how to work with your team and with your MSP, because we can't assume that your new customer is just intuitively going to understand and know how your internal support processes work. So we want to explain those to avoid confusion. And then you may want to mark this occasion with a special gift, just to serve as a thank you for partnering with you, and that you are showing your appreciation that they've selected you as their new MSP moving forward. Not necessary, doesn't have to be anything big, but it does and can work to really help create a positive start to your relationship and act as that constant reminder that you truly do value your business. Like, I've heard of MSPs, they'll send over a little swag box upon signing that has maybe a mug or a hat or a shirt or a coat or pens or notebooks or just something, just to show how appreciative you are that they selected you. Because ultimately, this is your opportunity to create that great first impression and to start laying that foundation for creating a strong and meaningful relationship. There's a lot of momentum to be had at this point in the relationship, and so we want to capitalize on that. Step 4 of our framework, this is where we start. We want to monitor and schedule our check-ins, because we want to see, within the first 60 to 90 days, how is the project going? How is the implementation going? How's the onboarding going? Because as the account manager, you likely may not be involved in the technical onboarding, but you do want to make sure that you're monitoring how that is going. And so you want to schedule, weekly or bi-weekly check-in calls with everyone involved, all those key stakeholders, just to ensure that the implementation is going according to plan and to solicit their feedback, because this is your opportunity to address maybe any questions or concerns that they may have. If it's thinking of, that's a lot of hand-holding at this point, it is, absolutely. You want to hand-hold your new customer through this entire process, because you want them to feel comfortable and you want them to feel assured that they've made a really great decision in partnering with you and that there is no regrets, because it's a big decision to switch MSPs. And so you want to make sure that, you're doing what you can to make them feel confident in that decision. Step 5 of the framework, this is where you want to schedule your first executive business review meeting. And this is typically done, around the 90, 100-day mark or 3-month mark, but in that time frame. And by scheduling this first meeting, you may not have a whole lot at this one, but it's what you are using to train your customers on the way that you do business and what you expect from that customer relationship. And if you start your executive review at that 3-month mark, this is how you're going to be setting a precedence with them moving forward, that this is just something they can come to expect on a regular basis. And then step 6 of the framework, once you've completed that first executive business review with all the key stakeholders, and that's again done within the first 100 days, at that same meeting, that's when we want to schedule our future review. Because again, we want to set that expectation, whether that's going to be 3 months, 6 months down the line. I probably wouldn't let it go more than 6 months at this point. But again, it's about setting that precedent, setting that cadence, that expectations that this is just what you do. You're an MSP that holds these meetings with their clients. Step 7, this is making sure that we're engaging in marketing to keep the customer engagement high. And so the goal of this type of marketing at this stage is, not to attract them and win them over to your MSP. You've already done that. But the goal with the marketing here is to continually remind them of why they chose you as their MSP, and to put out content that's going to continue to instill confidence that they've made the right decision, which then hopefully turns those customers into advocates who are going to speak very highly of your organization and therefore are going to want to refer other businesses to you. So I've just listed out some good marketing ideas that work well at this stage. Sending out regular emails, if you have a podcast, if you're doing blog posts, for thought leadership, just newsletters, letting them know what's new with you, what's new in the industry, any press releases, and then obviously keeping up on social. And then the last step of the account management process, you may or may not want to implement this, but I think it wouldn't hurt. Maybe sending a card or some sort of special gift, maybe at their birthday or maybe at Christmas, or maybe something just to commemorate their work anniversary with you. Nothing huge, nothing grand, just a small gesture, just to let them know that, something that will solicit kind of the warm and fuzzies and to help really solidify and cement that relationship further. Okay, so getting into what is an executive business review, because that was step 6 of our framework. I referenced that we need to start scheduling executive business reviews with our customers. It's a critical component of our account management motion. So what is an EBR? So really, an EBR is pretty much the most effective activity that you can engage in that's going to help strengthen and solidify the customer relationship with you post-sale. Now, I like using the term executive business review over something like QBR or VCIO or TCO, like a technical review. I forget what the C was. But basically, because then it serves as a reminder and signifies to your customer that this is an executive level conversation. You want to convey that the executive sponsors at the customer's site need to participate in the meeting with the executives from your MSP. So just a subtle change, but I think it does reinforce the fact that you want and need to meet with the C-suite executives, like the senior leadership team, when you are scheduling and delivering these meetings. And again, EBRs, extremely important, critical component of your overall sales process, something that I feel can either make or break, your relationship with your clients, honestly, because if they're done well, they can be instrumental in helping you uncover additional project work, sales opportunities, and that will help with your future forecasting and building your pipeline and really helping to fuel your growth as an MSP. Kind of case in point, I think we all know who Robert Herjavec is from Shark Tank. He was actually a keynote at our Empower event a couple of years ago, and his keynote was really focused on the power of account management and focusing on your existing customers. And he said that 85% of revenue growth comes from expansion from your existing base. And so he really encouraged all of our partners that were in attendance to expand with the customers you have by constantly upselling to them. Because if you're not doing these, or if they're done poorly, I think they can really turn customers off, from wanting to meet with you, because if they find them to be a waste of time, then they're not going to want to meet with you, and then ultimately it makes it a lot easier for another MSP potentially to come in and take them. And so really, EBRs are your way of keeping those lines of communication open, so that both parties are continually on the same page in terms of transparency and accountability, and that no one gets blindsided by things. And kind of going back to that service leadership report, they started kind of tracking, MSPs that were conducting strategy reviews with their customer, because they wanted to start looking into if there was any correlation between an MSP's profitability and the actual act of performing EBRs within their business. And they found that MSPs that do make EBRs a regular component of their customer relationship, they are experiencing on average 2.5 times higher profitability compared to those MSPs that don't make EBRs a regular activity within their business, because they discovered that for those MSPs that do conduct the regular EBRs, they are just naturally in better alignment with their customers on future infrastructure investments, future product investments, services investments, and then that is what really helps fuel your growth. Some amazing benefits of implementing an EBR process and doing these EBRs on a regular cadence, on a regular schedule, because EBRs, they are effectively designed to allow you to go deep, with your customers, and performing EBRs on a regular basis is probably the most effective activity that you can partake in to ensure active and ongoing engagement with your customers. And I say this because, we all have them. Those quiet customers. I know when I was in account management, you had your customers that you hardly ever heard from. They're not very demanding. They're not calling into your help desk much. So those are the types of partners that we especially want to establish an EBR cycle with them, to let them know and convey the message that, you want to be connected with them, even if you don't hear from them regularly on a more reactive or issue type of basis. Having those easy, non-needy clients are always great to have, but you don't want them to feel that your lack of involvement means that you don't care, and because that's just ultimately what opens them up to potentially being lured away by the competitors. And so implementing regular EBRs, that's what's going to help really raise your company's profile, hopefully raise the relevance of your MSP in the eyes of key stakeholders and decision makers, and hopefully they're going to see that you are providing real value to them, which is going to increase their level of stickiness with you, and again, make it more difficult for them to be led astray by your competition. And that's going to be critical because it's going to help you maintain your customer retention rates, avoid churn, and again, provides that predictability for future contract revenues from a business valuation standpoint. And so EBRs, they do provide that opportunity for transparent, open, honest discussions around your customer's overall business, the health of that business, and what you could potentially do to kind of maintain and improve that status for them. And that becomes your springboard to uncovering additional sales opportunities for you and the pipeline. And having those open, honest, transparent discussions can also benefit you in times of distress, and they can actually help you save client relationships, when something catastrophic happens and things go south. And why do I say this? And this really comes from a conversation I had with a partner of ours. He's a super elite partner out of Florida. He's been doing EBRs for years, and so he was an MSP that really helped me kind of, put the meat into this boot camp. But he shared with me a story how, because of his account management process, it actually saved a really highly valued client relationship. And so this MSP, his name is John, he had a customer, this big, expensive, high valued client, good customer, but he was wanting to kind of switch out the backup. He was implementing a new business continuity plan for all of his customers, and he wanted to get this customer into his new plan. He had an old backup product, and he was trying to move them into our Cove data protection. And this isn't an advertisement for Cove, but he was taking them from, I forget what he was using before, and wanted to move them into Cove. So he was having these regular quarterly meetings with them, and this was probably for a couple of years. And at each and every EBR, he'd review their tech roadmap with them. He would bring up the topic around the necessity of implementing this new, more robust backup and recovery plan with them, because that was the big point, is that with the old system, he wasn't going to be able to recover them as quickly as he would like, and that's why he was switching all of his clients over. But the customer always gave him some sort of reason why this just wasn't a good time, whether they didn't have the budget, they didn't want to be disruptive to their organization, let's talk about it next time. So whatever, it never really happened. And so I think you can all imagine where this story is going. So ultimately, this customer experienced a ransomware attack. had all their data encrypted. In the beginning, my partner didn't even think he would be able to help them recover any of the encrypted data, and that the customer would ultimately have to maybe pay the ransom to try and get their data back. But instead of the customer getting angry and emotional around all of this, they recognized that they had no one to blame except themselves for the mess that they were in, because they knew they had been continually warned by John and educated by John in every quarterly review that was conducted that John had something better. He wanted to move them into something better, but the customer wouldn't let him. And so that is a whole other boot camp on its own, that John actually continued to support the old backup product for some of his customers. But I digress, and we can talk about that later. But fortunately, the partner was able, John was able to get the data back for them, but it cost them a lot. It was a very costly endeavor from a remediation standpoint, from a time perspective standpoint. But because of that, after it was all said and done, John finally got them over into Cove because they didn't want to go through anything like this again. But it was because John was conducting his reviews and he made them such a critical component of his sales process. And he made a point that in each review, they highlighted areas where the business was exposed to risk. It took out the emotion from this ordeal because the customer understood that John made his recommendations. He talked about it openly and honestly. It was all documented. He talked about the consequences and what would happen and really what he would be able to do and not be able to do. But the customer just refused to listen and refused to make it a priority for their business. Whereas if John was the type of MSP that wasn't having these type of regular conversations with their customer, this could have been very messy, and this can be an intensely emotional situation. And there likely would have been a high probability of John getting fired, because he could be known as that MSP now in Florida that allows breaches to happen and allow their customers to have their data stolen. So there could have been real reputational damage as well as a result of this. But because John was having these regular conversations, it ended up removing a lot of that emotion from a very stressful situation. And, so in talking to MSPs, again, we're talking about their sales motions, their marketing motions. Do you do account management? Do you do EBRs? A lot of times I would have MSPs come back to me and say, I tried to do them stuff, but after a while, my customers told me that they didn't really want them, and they didn't really see a need for them. So I just stopped doing them. Or they would get told, yeah, we're a little bit too busy right now. Everything's working fine. I don't think we really need to see each other, do you? And so they would accept these, I guess, these excuses as a viable reason of just not to do them. But I think they're terrible reasons not to be doing EBRs, because as we just discussed, there's just so many good financial benefits to them, business benefits, but also risk mitigation benefits from conducting EBRs as well. And so when we kind of looked into why EBRs aren't as successful as maybe MSPs would like them to be, I think a big part is that MSPs, because they're not doing them, even though they, whether they don't know whether to structure them or they don't feel comfortable delivering them, they never get that comfort level with them. It could be that they tried doing them before, they didn't go very well, it's kind of awkward. So their clients, they just don't want to go through that again. And so the client said, no, it's okay, we don't need to meet again. And the MSP ultimately just stopped scheduling them with their customers. Or another reason why they're not very successful is the MSP just failed to deliver value in their presentation. Because they're lacking confidence in the whole EBR process and in their abilities to actually deliver an effective EBR, what happens? They tend to fall back on what they are comfortable with, and that's typically talking about technology and products and usage stats. So the EBR ends up becoming more tactical in nature and more product focused and more technology focused rather than what it should be, which is strategy and business focused. And so if they're falling back on what they know and what's in their wheelhouse, they're not going to provide that relevant insight that the executive team can actually use to help their business overall. Because this isn't the type of meeting where you deal with support questions or you deal with their concerns. You know, we're not using this meeting to look at status reports or review ticket information on, you know, what's happened in the past. You know, that I've seen partners do that. It's also not the type of meeting where you just kind of go in and you say, all right, how are things going? And then just hope the conversation flows from there. You know, EBRs have to have a purpose. You know, if they're going to be successful for you, it needs to have a structure. We have to build a process around this and make it a priority, and then also dedicate the right resources to it. Because if you are being more tactical in your EBRs, and again, in putting this boot camp together, I talked to a lot of different MSPs on their process, you know, ones that told me they do conduct EBRs, but a lot of them were tactical. You know, if you're going in there and you're showing usage reports and you're talking about, you know, how many machines have been patched, or that everyone's backup is up to date, or we answered all your tickets in, you know, our SLA guidelines, fine, but that's all in the past. That's all historical data. And a lot of that is probably information that really doesn't make sense to your customers anyway, like usage stats, metrics, especially historical data metrics, not really relevant. We want to take those numbers. If you're used to using reports or bringing reports in, don't show them graphs and pie charts and percentages or anything like that, because think about who you're speaking with. You're working with non-technical business owners for the most part. That kind of stuff is going to be meaningless. Your job as the MSP is to take those stats and take those metrics and translate it for them into something that's going to help improve their business, help them meet their goals and objectives, help them meet whatever outcomes they're expecting for their business in the short, medium, and longer term. And so that you can then figure out, you know, what do you need to do to support that for them. You know, EBRs is really your chance to look ahead with them so that you can gain a deeper understanding of what, you know, what their future plans are. And then you use your EBR to strategize how you can deliver, you know, on, you know, what technology changes need to be made to help deliver on those outcomes that they're looking for so they can meet those goals and objectives. And if you're able to do this, this is what helps you step out of that role as vendor and elevate yourself to playing that role of business advisor. And that's what's going to help build trust and help solidify that relationship with the customer to drive future sales. So if you are, you know, an MSP listening to me today and you've heard those excuses from your customers and you're not delivering these on a regular basis, then really kind of give some good thought as to what's holding them back, what's holding you back, and really work to fix the, you know, those perceptions, because no should not be the excuse that we really take at face value there. So again, why I think a lot of MSPs do struggle with delivering EBRs is because they don't have a good process or a good framework around it. So I want to go through, you know, kind of some steps on how do we prepare and get ready for an EBR, and then we'll get into what the EBR framework looks like next. But I think one of the, you know, step one of any EBR process is preparation. You know, preparation is going to be key. And when we talk about preparation here, I'm literally saying, you know, maybe 3 to 7 hours a quarter, if you're delivering these on a quarterly basis, to prep and then deliver your EBR. So I'm thinking a couple of hours just to research and gather all the necessary data, you know, to help prepare the report, help prepare the presentation. And especially if this is your first time around, as you get going, it probably won't be 2 to 3 hours, because you're going to know the customer, you're going to know their business, you're going to know the industry. But if this is, you know, kind of your first real step into delivering EBRs, probably a couple of hours per EBR is going to be needed, and then another 2 to 4 hours to actually deliver that EBR on site. And if you can, try and hold that meeting at your own MSP location. You know, hopefully you have a nice boardroom that you can invite your client to. And you might be thinking, oh God, 4 hours? That's a really long time to be holding your EBR meeting. But I say this because earlier this year, I actually had the opportunity to sit in on a client EBR meeting with one of our partners, European partners over in the UK. And it was an EBR meeting that was scheduled for 3 hours. It was being held from 11 a.m. to 2 p.m. So it was kind of held over lunch. And at first, when they were telling me about this, I thought it was a little bit odd to be holding a client EBR during that time. But right before the meeting started, the MSP's office manager came in, went around the room, and she took everybody's lunch order. And then about halfway through the meeting, lunch arrived, and then we kind of took a small break to eat lunch. And this was a brilliant move because we all know that when you can sit down and break bread with someone, that's when people start lowering their guards, and that's when they really begin to open up. And so when lunch was done and we resumed the meeting, you can tell that the dynamic of the meeting, the mood of the room had shifted, because in the beginning, they were meeting with a nonprofit, and so they were meeting with the finance director. And so the finance director came in, gonna say, he kind of had his back up against the wall, and he made a comment that he was looking forward to this meeting because it had been a long time since the MSP had reached out to them to schedule this meeting. So ding, 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 your customers want to meet with you, so make sure you get those meetings scheduled. But so the finance director was already a little miffed that it took this long to have this meeting. He felt that the MSP wasn't being very responsive to his needs, and there was kind of a wall there. In the beginning, I was a little uncomfortable, but after lunch, we all ate, we all talked. Night and day difference with this finance director. All of a sudden, he became much more forthcoming in the information that he provided to the MSP. He started to become very open about the technology business challenges that they were experiencing, talking about what the priorities were for the nonprofit. They had to scale back because of COVID, but they knew that they had to kind of move forward and start making more investments. So they were talking about what they were looking to achieve for the foundation. And he started to become very agreeable to some of the different recommendations and projects that the MSP was suggesting to try and help solve some of these business challenges that they were experiencing. Now, there was a sales engineer in the room. He was all ready to go if things turned technical. 3 hours, it never turned technical. It did not at all technology come into play. It was all around business challenges, business struggles, and what can be done to kind of help them overcome some of those struggles. And so by the end of the meeting, the finance director of the nonprofit actually said, well, I guess it's not if we put these recommendations into action, but more about when do we start. So a complete turnaround from how I thought it was going to go when it first started. And this EBR actually ended up securing the MSP a £70,000 project that was going to take about 12 to 18 months to implement. And this MSP, they allowed me to sit in on this customer EDR, but they make their EBRs a huge component of their account management strategy, to the point that they actually only have one salesperson that's tasked with going and finding new clients for the organization, but they have 10 client engagement managers who each have their own territory of 15 to 40 different accounts, just depending on the size of the customer. So again, just a kind of a good lengthy story, but put in the time, it is worth the effort. And if you can bring them into your office and feed them, wow, it made a huge difference for this particular one. But that's just their normal process for holding EBRs. So again, as you're working ahead of time to prep for this meeting, some other things that we want to take into account, make sure that you do understand what their decision-making process is. Do they make decisions and sign checks? Is it one person? Is it 3 people? Is it a committee? Is it a board of directors? You want to know that, because those are the people that you want to invite and make sure they attend that EBR. So you want to make sure and get confirmation that these key executives will be in attendance, so that things aren't lost in translation. Other prep work If you don't know this already, you likely probably already know this, but do make sure that you understand the customer, their business, their industry, their market niche. Make sure that you are up to date on whatever their latest industry news are, trends, issues, challenges that are being faced by that industry. See if you can figure out what's changing in the industry today, because changes gives you some good ammo to talk about with the customer and talk about what you can do to help them address those changes. We definitely want to make sure that we have a good understanding of what the customer's network looks like today, assess where their technology stands today with respect to your own predefined network and security standards that you have in place for all of your customers and in your organization. So you may want to do a risk assessment just prior to this meeting if you haven't done one recently, to try and get this information. Because if you uncover that your customer is not meeting your predefined standards, then this is something that has to be addressed during the EBR, just like John did. He knew that his customers, were on old backups, so he made sure he talked about the benefits of the new backup, what the breach consequences would be, and how easily he'd be able to recover. So he made sure he educated his customers on that, and he made sure that those recommendations got added into the technology roadmap, because the goal is to kind of close those gaps, via these meetings. And then from a services standpoint, in a lot of my marketing boot camps, I talk about this services white space matrix. This is really an internal exercise that you would go through with each of your customers. So for each customer, you would compare what services you're offering as part of your MSP practice, but look at and compare to what services are your customers not purchasing from you, because here's some new revenue opportunities for you, right? You can go in there, and if you know that this customer is only selling or buying a couple of services from you, but you have an advanced security package that you would like to upgrade them into, this is the opportunity for you to upgrade them and align them with that new package. All right, so let's get into what a sample EBR framework would look like if this is something that you don't have in place today. So there's basically 8 components to this framework that we're going to be reviewing. Keep in mind, this is just a framework. This is just something to get you started if you don't have anything in place today. As you get going, you're naturally will probably want to make changes to this, but this is just something just to kind of give you something to move forward with. And so the first part is putting together an agenda and sending out that agenda for what a typical EBR meeting would look like. Some partners have told me that prior to this meeting, they would actually build a report, get it bound, print it off and bound so it looks professional. They would put a presentation together because they felt it really exuded quality and authority. And obviously I really like that, but that's time consuming and that's expensive. But I do think it does elevate the seriousness of the meeting. But I've had other partners, John for one, who told me, I don't really do anything incredibly formal, but he does make sure that he has a report outlining the key recommendations and action items that are really important to him. And then that becomes like his working document that it gets updated and reviewed at each subsequent meeting. But looking at what a typical agenda would look like for an EBR, start off with introductions and just doing a meeting kickoff, going through kind of a what's new. It's an overview from your perspective, maybe news on your MSP, news on the industry. Keep this brief though, because this isn't you and you talking about how great you are. We want to keep this meeting very focused on the customer. Then we're going to get into a review of the current IT environment situation, focusing on risk, security, compliance. You're going to take them through what their current risk exposure is, and they're part of an industry that's regulated. You're going to do a compliance and regulatory review. You're going to want to make sure that you're kept up to date on what their business goals and objectives are. If maybe they've changed from the sales process, you're going to do kind of a life cycle asset overview plan with them, do a review of their asset and their software and their staffing overview. You're going to take them through a copy of the technology roadmap. This is something you want to discuss because you want to prioritize projects and you want to start getting their preliminary buy-in for these different projects, and then review the accompanying IT budget that goes along with that, and then making sure that we're setting aside time for any Q&A. any questions that might pop up that needs to ask. And then we move into that meeting wrap up. And this is where we kind of want to see if we can grab some referral opportunities, if we can, benefit from some marketing and testimonials and quotes, get some good feedback, and then making sure that we are getting that next meeting date set, because you don't want to leave the meeting before the next meeting is scheduled. So looking at the meeting kickoff, obviously you want to introduce yourself if there are stakeholders from the client side that maybe you've never met before. So you want to make those introductions. Talk about the purpose of holding these types of meetings, because if they've never, if you're new to them and they've never done this with their previous MSP, provide a review and say, this is why we hold these. They're very important to strengthening our relationship, because working together, our goal is to help improve your business, improve your overall business performance. And so we want to have these ongoing meetings so we can be in alignment with that. Then spend a few moments going over the agenda with them. Probably you're going to send this over ahead of time so that they have it if they need to make additions to it, or if they have questions around it, you can kind of get that addressed ahead of time. In this meeting kickoff, there's a very high likelihood that this is where they're going to start pummeling you with questions. And if they start pummeling you with questions, respectfully let them know that in the interest of time, you want to stick to this agenda as closely as possible, but you have allocated time at the end to go through any of the questions that they may have. So this is where we just kind of want to park those questions and then make a mental note or write it down to not forget to ask the partner or the customer about those questions, like come back to that because we don't want them to get overlooked or missed. And so put a pin in that, and then take some time to maybe highlight again any important industry news, new product announcements, maybe some brief updates about your MSP that would be good for them to know. Next, we want to get into providing a quick overview of their current IT situation. So yes, I've said an EBR is meant to be forward-looking. It's not something that delves too deeply on what has happened in the past, but it does make sense to spend some time to review what the current situation looked like, where do things stand as it relates to their business and any items that maybe you're currently already working on for them. So if there are any open projects that are still going on, use this time to provide kind of a quick recap, confirm, with the client that hopefully expectations are being met. So kind of do that temperature check that, you are meeting their expectations in terms of how it's being executed, the time frame, and any deadline that you've set for that project. This isn't the time to dive into all of the minutia of the projects that are currently in flight here. If the client begins to go down that rabbit hole, this is where we kind of want to, do a timeout, schedule a meeting, and say, hey, can we discuss these, maybe tomorrow or later on this week? Because I know these are a concern for you. I want to talk about them as well, and I want to make sure we allot the right appropriate amount of time for that. Also, spend a few moments to acknowledge if there's any elephants in the room. If there's any unresolved or open tickets, make sure that we address them. If there are unresolved issues, we don't want them to overshadow or cloud what we're hoping to accomplish with today's session. This isn't the time to do a deep dive on those unresolved or open tickets either, but again, make a note of the client's concerns, what questions they have, what feedback, and then when you get back to the office, get someone to reach out to that client immediately with answers, resolutions, or a plan, because again, we don't want that overshadowing what the point of this meeting is. Next, you want to review their compliancy, their security, risk exposure, any concerns that you may have as it relates to their organization. So part of the current overview discussion is you do want to review how well are they doing in meeting your current security baseline standards, that you have in place, for preventing ransomware and security attacks on your clients. And hopefully you are working or aligned yourself to some sort of cybersecurity framework, whether it's the CIS controls or NIST or whatever the security standards are in your part of the world that you're listening to me today. This is an extremely important conversation that has to be included in every EBR that you have with your clients. And I think given the security threat landscape today, now more than ever. But again, we do want to keep this conversation high level and business focused. So it's really, with this part, comparing the current reality when it comes to their network security to what you would consider to be ideal, again, aligning to probably a cybersecurity framework for that. So what you want to discuss here is, where are they not making the proper investments in terms of their technology, from a risk, from a security standpoint, and talk about what you believe they need to do and highlight what the consequences and what the potential outcomes should be should they choose not to make those investments. And that's what John kept doing in each of his EBRs that he had with his customers about the backup. He said, we need to make a different investment. We need to improve what we have today. I found technology has changed. I need to implement this better technology across your business to be able to better protect you from a security and breach standpoint. Because your goal as their MSP is to keep them safe, secure, and protected. Your mandate is to prevent them from being breached, to architect a system where all employees are able to work securely without putting the business in harm's way of a potential ransomware attack. Because if you think about the cause of breaches, there's different stats. I've heard anywhere from 37% to 87%, but there's a human element that's involved in a lot of breaches that occur. And so you want to make sure that you're architecting a system and a service for them that works to protect employees from themselves, from clicking on something that they shouldn't click on. And if you're not having these regular discussions with your customers, the sad truth is that your customers are already assuming that you're doing this for them, and they're expecting that you're already doing this for them, even though they may not be properly paying you for that service. So another big benefit of the EBRs is protecting you from these assumptions. If there are gaps in their network and security coverage that you know about, you need to make the client aware of these as well. You want to use this time to discuss those deficiencies in an open and honest format, educate them on the ramifications and what the potential costs could be if these changes are not implemented. And I'm not talking about using fear, uncertainty, and doubt here. I'm just talking about having an open conversation around what the reality is today, where you would like to see them, and what could happen if we don't make those changes or those investments. And to help navigate that discussion, you can use what I refer to as a risk register. And I'm just kind of showing an example of a screenshot there of a sample risk register, very similar to the one that I talked about in my boot camp a couple of weeks ago on conducting assessments that yield results. And that focuses on how to conduct a business and security assessment as part of your pre-sales MSP process. And the idea behind using something like a risk register and including it in your EBR talk track is it is meant to really document and keep track of all of the different security risks that you've identified within that client's organization, any deviations from your security standards that are evident in their security and network infrastructure setup. And so this becomes something, again, that you can use and refer to in every EBR conversation that you have, so you can stay on top of those issues, that you've identified that might make them prone to falling victim to that cyber attack. And you can use it to kind of remind them of the project work and the additional services that you would like to add to their monthly plan fee that you ultimately need budget approval for. And so I think the biggest benefit of incorporating something like a risk register within your EBR is that you're using this to shift risk away from your MSP. You're pushing the risk back onto the customer so that in the event that something does happen, you can use this document to fall back on. You can demonstrate that you did make the customer aware on numerous occasions how their network was deficient, and that you had provided recommendations on what was needed to improve it from a cybersecurity and cyber resiliency standpoint. But at the end of the day, the customer just wouldn't approve the extra expenses, for whatever reason. And this is also something that you can then show the insurance company, if that incident is something, severe enough that it warrants the organization having to file a claim for it. Because when a claim is filed, we all know that the insurance company is going to try and find a way to get out of, paying that claim. They're going to be looking for who is negligent. And so you can show the insurance company this risk register to prove and protect your MSP that you did your due diligence, that you were not the negligent party in this case, but at the end of the day, the customer just didn't want to pay to implement your services. And just as a follow-up, I have a boot camp that I'm delivering next month, brand new boot camp for Cybersecurity Awareness Month, and it's focused on how to not let your MSP become the next big headline. And I'm talking about referencing 3 legal cases, court cases that are going on in the moment, where 3 MSPs are being sued or were sued by their customers because their customers suffered a breach, and they were blaming their MSP for that breach, and they were looking for monetary restitution for that. And so in my boot camp, I I'm going to review these 3 court cases and then talk about some key lessons, some key takeaways. And just as a spoiler alert, one of those key takeaways is when you went through the different court cases and what we know about the breach, these 3 MSPs were not having regular meetings with their clients. They were not having sit-down meetings on a regular basis to have these kind of conversations with their customers. The customers assumed that they were protected, but they really weren't, because the MSP wasn't having these types of conversations. And the sad point is that all 3 of these court cases could have 100% been avoided if the MSP had been having these regular QBR, EBR discussions with their customers. So I'm going to be talking about that in my next month's boot camp. There's going to be 9 other takeaways as well, but takeaway number 10, again, spoiler alert, is the importance of making sure that you're conducting QBRs to keep you out of the courts and to keep your customers from trying to blame you and point the finger at you. And so if you are a little bit nervous on how to introduce this topic to your customer, I think it works best to really focus the conversation around the changing security landscape. And the recommendations that you're making are really meant to help mitigate their overall business risk and reduce their exposure to breaches and ransomware attacks. So you can kind of start off the conversation by saying, you know what, you've probably noticed there's terrible publicity, surrounding organizations these days that have experienced an attack, and MSPs are being blamed for that. And I would hate for you to have to experience something like this for yourself and for your business. So I want to talk today, make sure that you're in alignment with all of our security best practices. And then this is where you can then review that risk register with them and what you would like to see changed or implemented. There's also some probing questions that you can use to help guide that conversation, especially if you happen to get any pushback from your customer, as you are speaking with them, so getting them to talk about, what would be the outcome in their world if their network was hacked or data was breached. Asking them, how long could you afford to have your doors closed in the event of a breach attack? Would your employees still be able to work and be productive? Because in your own mind, as they are talking to you, looking at their existing setup today, if it's going to be, probably 60 days before you'll be able to get them back up and running with the existing current setup, be straightforward with them and say, okay, I understand what your expectations are, but this is what the reality is. So you want to do kind of that comparison. And if a customer tells you that they can only be offline for a day or 2 at most, and that what they have in place today, you're never going to be able to meet that RTO objective. Again, this is where you need to have that conversation and devise that plan so that you can improve that for them. And maybe it involves implementing a warm spare server, maybe it involves upgrading their existing backup, like John was trying to do, or maybe it involves implementing some endpoint detection or managed detection in the environment. You can make these options known and then get them documented into the tech roadmap, into the tech budget. And then asking them some additional questions like, what would be the impact on your business if data was stolen and you could not get it back, or I was not able to recover it for you? If it was published and made accessible on the dark web and your competitors were able to get at to it, what kind of impact would that be? And, also, maybe they have their own security concerns that you want to talk to them about. So as you're talking about what your concerns are for them, they may have their own concerns as well that maybe you hadn't even thought of, but they're closer to the industry than maybe you are, and so maybe they're hearing some of their peers kind of talk about that. So we want to make sure that we ask them if they have any security concerns as well, and if they do, that gets folded into the project plan. But ultimately what this boils down to is you want to make them aware of what your standards are. You want to help them understand where they're failing to meet your standards. And again, your standards align to a cybersecurity framework. And then you want to talk about how those gaps are going to impact their business, and then review what your recommended action plan is to help fix that for them and make sure that that gets put into their tech roadmap and their tech budget. And then after that, we want to make sure that we're doing a compliancy and regulatory review. If you know that the customer does happen to fall under any sort of compliancy legislation, and if you're dealing with anybody in healthcare, banking, education, government, legal, they do. And so part of the current overview discussion is you are going to want to review how well are they doing at adhering to their compliancy standards that that governing body has in place for their industry. Are they compliant? Are they partially compliant? Would they fail an audit if they were audited? Because compliancy isn't an option. If you have organizations that fall under HIPAA or GDPR or CMMC, PCI, SOC, they don't have an option whether they want to be compliant or not. They have to be compliant or they're going to face fines or even worse. So including that compliancy conversation as part of your EBR is another great springboard that you can leverage to help improve and drive revenues for your business. Because at its core, compliancy is really about ensuring that the fundamentals are in place and then proving that those fundamentals are being done correctly. And so this is where you want to highlight the different compliancy standards that the business falls under, that they must conform to, talk about areas that they're doing well, areas where you feel they're falling short, and then put your recommended plans made known, which is likely might mean new services or a project plan or something. But again, additional project work potentially for your MSP. Looking at the business goals and objectives and reviewing all of these. Because if you are having some struggles getting people to attend EBRs, it might be because the customer's not seeing value in them. They can't justify taking their most important, most expensive people in their business and make them make time to speak with you. So we need to work on changing that perspective. And so we want to change the structure of the meeting so that the clients see the value in your EBR process. And so looking at what delivers value, having strategic content that is focused on their goals, their objectives, having conversations around how you can help them achieve those goals and the desired outcomes that they're looking for. That is what delivers value. Showing them charts, graphs, metrics with numbers, that necessarily is not going to deliver value unless you are translating that for them. And so we want to make sure that we're reviewing, what are their existing business goals, what are their objectives, what are their priorities, their expectations, what's new in the business since the last discussion, what's new in the industry since the last discussion, what's changed in the industry that might be causing them concerns. Are there any issues that's preventing them from, generating more sales, generating more revenue for their business? Where are they struggling? Can they tell you, one or two top challenges that they're facing right now? Are they able to tell you what's the least profitable or least productive part of their business? What's their overall vision? Where does the C-level team expect the business to grow, in the next 1 to 3 years down the line? Do they have any major initiatives coming up? Are they planning any mergers or acquisitions? Are they planning any office moves, any new products or services that they're taking to market? Because this is where you need to then figure out, does their existing technology align to their growth and to those projects and to those priorities that they've set for themselves? And then next, we do want to do a review of the different hardware and software that's in the organization. And so in this section, this is where you're going to review the organization's current hardware setup. You're going to run through different warranty reports, end of life options, with the client that they need to be aware of? You know, do they have any hardware warranties that need to be renewed, or any assets that are past their use life? Because if there's hardware that is becoming end of life, and maybe you're the type of MSP that doesn't support out of warranty hardware, you want to make them known, let them know about that. Because also, when you're talking about aging equipment, talking about how this could be detrimental to their overall organization productivity and efficiency. It actually could put their organization at risk from a security perspective. So if there is hardware items that need to be replaced, talk about why you're recommending what you're recommending, and help them plan for when these replacements are going to need to be happening, so that the client understands that they can budget for them and get that onto the tech roadmap and into the tech budget. You may also want to use this time to review any current vendor contracts that they may have, and you might want to get involved in that, because maybe you have some strategic partnerships with phone providers, ISPs, copier providers, and you know, maybe they're not happy with who they're using today, but you have a strategic partnership where you can refer that business over to them, and then hopefully vice versa. And then looking at the software side of things and the applications that your clients are using to help them run their business, it is important to fully understand all the applications that the customer is using in their business, you know, all hosted applications, all on-premise applications. Again, just like you did with hardware, find out if any software is being sunsetted, or maybe it's being underutilized, and so that you can help determine what the next steps are going to be. Because maybe for a piece of software, there's several users that haven't logged in for, you know, 3 or 4 months. You know, you want to find out why that is. Have they moved departments and they're no longer needing that particular piece of software to do their job? Are they no longer with the company? So it's a good review and a good conversation to have, because there could be security concerns if the employee is no longer with the company, but they still might have access to that particular piece of software, even though they shouldn't, and, you know, ultimately potentially putting the organization at risk. Or you can help them save on licensing costs, because these are funds that could be freed up and then be redirected to be spent elsewhere. Like maybe you're trying to introduce new sets of services. That money could be reallocated to those different set of security services. And so for each application, you want to find out, you know, how critical are these applications to the business. Have them explain to you what the impact on the business would be if the employees lost access to those particular applications, and find out, you know, how long could they realistically go if these applications went offline and something happened and they wouldn't have access to them anymore. And so to help with this exercise, you may want to have the customer kind of go through each of the software and give it a rating, you know, maybe a critical rating, a high rating, or a moderate rating, or something like that, color code it. So again, a good discussion topic to have, because if there's certain applications that they deem as critical and they can tolerate at most maybe 4 hours of downtime and maybe an hour's worth of lost data, but you know from that existing network and security setup that you can never get them back online within that 4-hour window, this is going to allow you to have that honest talk about what needs to be done to correct that. And then if it involves a project, it gets added onto the tech roadmap, into the tech budget for prioritization and review. But if they don't want to make those necessary investments to meet, you know, maybe that 4-hour window, then at least you can say you had the discussion with them. You've made your recommendations known. You've given them options that have been clearly documented on the tech roadmap, and the customer now understands that they're now assuming that business risk. There may be increased support costs that they're going to have to pay for because of this, but make them aware that they are now assuming that risk. That risk is not on you. So it's really about getting off the hook if or when something happens. And again, like John had experienced, removing that emotion, that blame when something unexpected knocks everybody offline, that downtime occurs. And then you also want to conduct that people overview as well, because people are an asset. So you want to review the most recent copy that you have of the employee list, so you can kind of see where there might be gaps there. Opportunity to clean up the list, you know, find out who has left the organization, because from a security standpoint, you're going to want to make sure that all of those proper offboarding activities that they've been completed so that they don't impose any unnecessary, costly, undue risk onto the organization. Also ensures that if any new employees were hired that maybe you weren't told about, it provides you with the opportunity to amend your monthly price accordingly so that they can get added into the support contract and so that you can be properly invoice them moving forward. And again, it allows you to kind of have those staffing changes, right? You know, are they expanding? Are they contracting? Are they opening up new locations? They're going to be hiring new employees, or maybe they're planning layoffs. And so again, you want to be blindsided by that. But either way, depending on how that staffing requirement conversation goes, that's going to help you plan accordingly and get those projects added onto the tech roadmap and onto the tech budget. Which leads us to the tech roadmap. So each of your customers should have, ideally, a technology roadmap that's looking out, 12 to 36 months, because this becomes something that then gets discussed at every EBR session moving forward. So if you're not the more formal type of MSP, having your risk register, having your tech roadmap, have at least these two pieces that you bring to your EBR, because these are your living, breathing documents between your MSP and the customer. It's something that gets updated and reviewed at every customer meeting. It helps bring consensus on future projects and expenditures. And so I'm just showing a screenshot here of the technology roadmap planning book. What did I actually call it? Sorry, it's a handout in the handout section. The Executive Business Review Template, that's what it's called. There's a handout there. This is part of it. It's not pretty, admittedly, but it's just meant to kind of give you something to capture data should you need it. I also included the EBR framework there as a handout as well for downloading. There are some really good toolkits out there that can help MSPs with this roadmap planning exercise with their customers. ScalePad's Lifecycle Insights is one of them, but a lot of the partners, and even John included that I spoke about, they're just using simple Excel and Word to kind of track everything. So you can make it as fancy or as basic as you want. But the idea with the technology roadmap, this does serve as your action plan. It's an action plan that everybody, both parties agree to. Together you decide what changes are going to need to be made to their existing network sometime in the future, so that it meets, again, your network, your security standards that you have in place, as well as the growth and revenue goals that they've communicated to you as well. So as you start having these conversations, it's very likely that your tech roadmap is going to kind of contain, hopefully, a large set of different projects that have been identified, based on what the client's goals and objectives are, and the different gaps that you've identified with respect to their security and compliancy. But you're necessarily not going to be able to do all of these projects all at once. So you're going to use your EBR session to prioritize these projects and get consensus on which projects are you going to tackle first. And then with each subsequent EBR session, that roadmap, it's going to allow for continual discussion on different projects. Those that are kind of a year or two out, you're not going to be doing them in the near future, but you're keeping them top of mind by continually referring to this document. And that's going to allow the customer to accurately plan for and budget and prepare for those projects, both financially and mentally. And it's going to give everybody the confidence, including yourself, in terms of the financial security as to what is to come with respect to that client's technology in the years ahead. It's also going to help you manage that trailing effect, right? As you complete different projects for the client, you can then remind them at each review meeting, here's the rest of the projects that we still have deemed important. So let's reprioritize this list and start planning on what we're going to tackle next from this list. And so this really does help to kind of keep your pipeline and your forecast clean and up to date as you work to implement these different projects. And that's just going to help you better manage your revenues and your profitability for your MSP business overall. And not to keep turning back to the dark side, but in the event of any potential legal action or unfortunate incident, like what John went through, who refused to upgrade to his new backup product, and they ended up getting breached and lost their data, potentially lost their data, conducting regular EBRs and reviewing this tech roadmap with them, each time you speak with them is going to continue to highlight your concerns. It's going to protect you and your business, and it's going to prove to the auditors, to the insurance companies, that you've done your due diligence, that you've educated the client on what is necessary. But ultimately, we got to push the risk back to them. They're the ones that are now assuming the risk, and it becomes their problem if they don't want to heed your advice and your recommendations, and the consequences then fall on them. So looking at what accompanies the tech roadmap is the technology budget. It ties in very, very closely. A lot of organizations may not be budgeting accurately for their IT. They may not understand what their IT requirements are to sustain growth of their business. And a lot of them are looking for clear recommendations and support for that. So as part of the EBR process, you do want to let the customer know that you are going to be providing a technology budget for them, and that you are going to review this with them during every EBR meeting, because we need to get your input and we need to get your feedback. And so based on their business objectives, their project plans, whatever is on that technology roadmap, the budget is going to provide all those costing details or some estimates for that. And so you want to make sure that, if there's new hardware that needs to be put into play, that we're budgeting for that. If there's any new software or new services that comes into play to, diminish some risk, that we're including that as well. So by having this technology budget conversation with them, it's allowing you to be transparent about what they, upcoming costs are going to be, so that they can be prepared for them. And it also provides you with the benefit of you kind of getting agreement ahead of time of future sales, so you can forecast that and include it in your pipeline. Also, the additional benefit of including something like this in your EBR is that the CFO or the finance person that's going to be in the room, hopefully, they're going to be really interested in this section of your meeting, and they're likely going to want a copy of this budget so that they can review it further. And now, all of a sudden, you have your buy-in, right? You have your engagement. You have a C-suite executive that now sees value in this meeting and in this discussion. And then once you become their budgeting go-to person for all things technical, when additional expenses or purchases pop up, they're going to be coming to you first to consult with you. And then anything else. So this is where we go back and look at things that may have been parked from components earlier on in the conversation. So anything that came up earlier on in the EBR process outside of the agenda, this is where we wanted to make sure we were capturing those items so that we can circle back and discuss them if time permits, because we do want to try and answer all questions on site while we're meeting with them. But if we can't, at least we have them documented and we can make reference to that and say, look, we ran out of time, but let's schedule another time or a call, and we can work to get these questions addressed. And then we need to wrap up the meeting. So once you've had that business conversation, we don't want to end the EBR until we seek validation and get feedback on how the meeting went. So this may be a cringy activity for you, again, if you're not used to delivering EBRs, but you do want to get an honest rating and feedback on how the session went. What was the meeting experience like for them? Because by soliciting a rating, this is where you're going to be able to see, what improvements to your structure do you need to be making? What changes to the flow do you need to be making? And so that you can then track these ratings over time to see how they're improving. Just like we do, if you've attended any head nerd boot camps in the past, and what's going to be coming up in a few moments is I'm going to be asking you to rate the presentation today, because it's only by getting that rating on 1 to 5 if I'm going to know if I've hit the mark or not. So you do want to make sure that you're getting validation and feedback on that. And then you want to tell them once you're back in the office, you are going to send over a meeting summary of all the action items that you discussed. You might most likely have to send over an updated technology roadmap and budget based on these latest discussions. Then also we want to see, depending on how the meeting goes, if there's an opportunity here to solicit any referral business. Saying something like, you know what, I really enjoy working with my customers on these type of strategic exercises, helping them make the most out of the technology so that it maximizes the impact on their overall business success. We're always looking for new businesses like yours. Do you happen to know or have any colleagues or peers or business associates that maybe you can introduce us to? You know, we won't get referrals if we don't ask. This is the time to ask them at the end of your QBR. Also, use this time for to leverage any marketing opportunities as well. You know, maybe they can give you a quote. Like if it's a positive engagement, maybe there's a quote, maybe there's a testimonial, maybe there's a case study afterwards that you might be able to have written about them. See if they would mind going to Google or LinkedIn and writing a review for you that you can then post to your website or post to your social media feed. Or see if they'll take a picture with you that you can then post to your feed. You know, we all know that if you see a feed full of happy customers, that's going to instill confidence in prospects that, oh, okay, this MSP their customers really seem to like them. And then, as I said earlier, lastly, before you schedule or before you leave, make sure you get that next EBR on the books. Maybe it's 4 months down the line, 3 months down the line, 6 months down the line. You figure that out with your customer, but make sure you get that next meeting booked. Then we have the post-meeting follow-up. Again, once we return to the office, make sure you review all your notes that were taken. Hopefully you took notes. If you can't write notes, bring someone to be a note taker for you, because we want to turn all of these discussion points into action items. Our best-in-class MSPs that are good at being diligent and disciplined with their EBRs, they actually turn every single action item into a ticket, and they input these into their PSA and then assign it to someone so they can track it for updates and for completion. Because I think this is the most critically important part of the entire EBR process, because you don't want to let anything fall through the cracks and go unactioned, because this is what's going to quickly cause your customer to lose faith and lose trust in you, and they're not going to want to meet with you again. Because if you just took up 4 hours of their time and you came up with you thought was a good solid plan and activities, but you never followed through on that, you know, they're not going to want to meet with you again. So you want to make sure that there's a documentation and follow-up process so that nothing gets amiss. So other follow-up items to do once you're back at the office. Again, if there's updates to the tech roadmap, tech budget, get that done, make those updates, get them sent over, because these are going to be what you're going to be relying upon for your next EBR, you know, 4 months, 6 months down the line. You're going to be able to review where things stand, where the priorities are, see if there's been any changes. If there's any sales opportunities that come out because of this, make sure your account manager is starting to work on those. Get those opportunities inputted into your CRM. If there's any service requests, again, that elephant in the room, anything that came out, make sure they get inputted into your ticketing system as well for tracking purposes. Delegate to someone to own it, make it a high priority item, and so that those issues can get, those tickets can get closed and resolved. If you were fortunate to receive any names or any referrals of businesses during the visit, make sure you reach out immediately to those organizations. You know, whether you send a letter, maybe you send an email, maybe you call, referencing the customer that provided you the name, introduce yourself, see if there might be a potential for initial discovery meeting there. And then if you were given some referrals, send a thank you card, gifts, a small token to show your appreciation. Don't wait necessarily for a deal to close or before you meet with that prospect. Send it over immediately. Show them that you are appreciative, that they thought to provide you with some names. And then if a deal does close as a result of that, send something else afterwards. Send another small gesture, token, card, what have you. And then make any tweaks to your EBR process if you feel that is necessary, because this is a process like anything else. If there are some topics of conversation, some conversation starters, some flow activities that you felt work really well, make those updates to your standard operating procedures for your EBR process and get them implemented. You know, make note of what worked well, maybe what didn't work well, maybe what was cringy, and constantly work to refine what that process looks like. All right, so hopefully throughout today's session, if you're not doing EBRs today, if you don't have a proper account management motion in place for your organization, I've conveyed how important I think it is to develop such a motion for your MSP, especially from an EBR, making sure that that gets incorporated as part of your account management motion for continued growth and success. If you want to make more money, make EBRs a priority. Because again, EBRs, just like anything else within your MSP, it's a process, right? It should be documented. There should be a structure around it. There should be a methodology so that it can be delivered in a repeatable fashion so that all customers receive the same experience and the same benefits. And keep in mind that your EBR process is going to evolve over time. It's an iterative process. The idea here is if you're not doing them or you're not disciplined in doing them on a regular basis, just start and just start putting that regular cadence into effect. And if you're not comfortable going out in front of your customers, then we do have to dig deep and figure out a way to overcome this because these really should be made a priority for your MSP. And so if you do have hesitations, to help build up your confidence, do some role playing. Maybe you have a good business mentor, some peers that you can work with. Start by practicing with your existing clients first, those that you have a really good, exceptional relationship with. I used to do this all the time. Anytime I had to deliver a new presentation when I was in sales and account management, I had my list of probably 10, 15 really good partners that I could turn to and say, hey, do you mind if I practice this on you, before I bring it out to my wider territory? Because these are the customers that are going to go easy on you, right? They're going to allow you to make mistakes, but they're also going to be very beneficial in helping you to improve your process. And then you can build up to be engaging with your more difficult clients after that. And as I mentioned, I did talk to quite a few different MSPs who do account management, do QBRs, EBRs, and I wanted to get their advice. Some of the most common piece of advice that I was given is these do not need to be perfect. You definitely do not want perfection to be the enemy of the good. And as someone who I have to remind myself all the time around that, don't let perfection be the enemy of good. Like any process that you have implemented for your business, it's not going to go smoothly at first. There's going to be kinks that have to be worked out. But by starting with an initial framework, through practice, repetition, getting feedback, soliciting feedback from your good customers, you're just going to end up naturally molding and improving that structure from there. And it's going to get easier and you are going to become more comfortable with the prospect. I think John actually said it best when I was interviewing him. Even though he's very good at delivering EBRs, he doesn't make it a big formal deal. Like I said, he has a couple of documents that he brings with them. He's really big on keeping it conversational. Look at the EBR meeting as catching up with friends. It's a conversation with a side serving of structure, but just be sure to identify what the most important pieces are that you're hardlined about. So that's where that risk register comes into place, because that would be kind of what you're hardlined about. And then be sure to cover those items and then let it go from there. Okay, so just some what's next as we begin to wrap up. If everybody would indulge me for 2 more minutes. Take this boot camp again. It is available on demand. If there was parts that you wanted to listen to, or if there was pieces that you wanted to forward off to other team members, it is available for you there. Make sure if you haven't done so yet that you've downloaded a couple of those handouts there, the EBR framework and the executive business review template as well. If you're not accustomed to delivering EBRs, select, build out your process and then select a couple of good customers to begin the prospect or the process with. And then if you have any questions, I have my office hours taking place next week. Send me an email, send me a direct message on LinkedIn, reach out to your PSM. We have a lot of resources here to help you with that. 2 more slides two more slides to show you. This is just to really kind of show where we are in my whole boot camp schedule. When I create my boot camp training schedule, it's a schedule. So we are now done and we're starting back at the top again of the MSP growth planning process, cracking the code to growing your MSP. It takes place in 2 weeks, I believe, end of September. This is really focusing on strategic planning for your MSP. Maybe it's for as we move into Q4, maybe it's for 2025. But the idea is there's benchmarking KPIs we're going to review, how do you build a roadmap? Can't build a roadmap of where you want to go if we don't know where we stand today. And so we're going to be talking about different levers that you may want to include in that roadmap to help grow your MSP. And then everything flows out of that roadmap, you know, where we talk about program development, building programs, marketing, building a sales strategy around that. Perfect. So thank you everyone for taking time out of your day. Absolutely appreciate it. If there's any questions that come out of the material that was presented today, never hesitate to send me an email, connect with me on LinkedIn, whatever I can do to help. So enjoy the rest of your afternoon and your evening, and have a good weekend. Thanks, guys.